lonely gunslinger, saved a woman from the noose, then called her his bride that same night. The gallows stood stark against the reddening sky, its beams black like the bones of some ancient beast. The prairie wind rattled the boards and carried, with it, the low murmur of townsfolk gathering in a crooked circle. Their eyes were hungry, their voices sharp, waiting for the spectacle of another neck breaking in the twilight. Mary Ellen's wrists were bound tight with hemp rope, the coarse strands digging into skin rubbed raw from hours of restraint. She stumbled when the deputy shoved her forward, her bare feet kicking dust that clung to her skirt. Once she had worn pale dresses trimmed in lace, but now the fabric was stained from days in a cell, sweat, and fear. She bit her lip hard to keep the tears from spilling. If she must die, she would die silent. The sheriff's voice cut across the murmurs. Mary Ellen Price, for the crime of cattle thieving and conspiracy with known outlaws, you've been sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. His words fell heavy, without mercy. Mary Ellen's head jerked up. I never stole a thing, she cried, her voice hoarse from days without water enough. But the jeers drowned her protest. To them, a woman was no more shielded from judgment than a man, especially when poverty painted suspicion on her skin. The noose swayed like a serpent above her. The hangman, a wide-shouldered man with tobacco-stained beard, adjusted the knot, humming low as though this were nothing more than routine. Her stomach turned. She thought of her younger brother, left alone in the shack they once called home, and prayed the neighbors might take pity on him. Step forward. The sheriff motioned. The crowd leaned closer, eyes bright in the dying light. That was when the silence broke. Hooves thundered down the dusty road, fast and sharp. A lone rider emerged, cutting through the horizon's glow, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low, coat flapping with speed. The horse reared as he pulled hard, dust swirling up in a golden halo. The man's revolver gleamed as he dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a finality that hushed even the jeering crowd. He moved with purpose, each step echoing across the wooden planks as though he owned the very ground. Hold it. His voice was low, gravelly, but carried farther than any shout. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his holster. This ain't your affair, stranger. It is now. The gunslinger's gaze swept over the scene. The rope, the pale, trembling woman, the circle of eager eyes. He stood tall, lean but strong, the kind of strength born not from plenty, but from years of fighting to keep breath in his lungs. His jaw was cut like stone, beard shadowing the edge, and his eyes, steel gray, storm-touched, fixed on Mary Ellen as though she were the only soul alive. She's innocent, he said. The crowd muttered. One man shouted, What proof you got? The gunslinger's hand rested easy on his revolver. Proof enough that I'll not watch her die. The sheriff bristled. You got no call to interfere with justice. Justice? The gunslinger stepped closer, his boots creaking on the platform. Or convenience? He looked at Mary Ellen, and something in her, something long-starved, broke loose. In those storm-gray eyes was no hunger for a spectacle, no judgment, only defiance on her behalf. Her throat ached, but she found a whisper. Please, it was barely sound, but he heard. The hangman shifted uneasily, his thick hands gripping the rope. Sheriff, I don't want no trouble. The sheriff spat. Then cut her loose. Ain't worth blood. The rope slackened, falling heavy on Mary Ellen's shoulders. Her knees buckled, and for a moment the world blurred into nothing but the pounding of her heart. Strong hands caught her before she fell, hands calloused, steady, smelling faintly of leather and gun oil. You'll stand, the gunslinger murmured, lifting her upright with surprising gentleness. You're not done yet. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he led her down from the platform. No one dared step in his path. The air was heavy with awe, anger, and a grudging respect for a man who would stare down the law and not blink. When they reached his horse, Mary Ellen tried to speak, but her lips only trembled. He lifted her onto the saddle as though she weighed no more than a child. Then he swung up behind her, one arm circling to steady her. The sheriff called after them. "You can't just take her." The gunslinger glanced over his shoulder, eyes like flint. "Watch me." With a kick, the horse leapt forward, hooves striking sparks from the earth. The town shrank behind them, the gallows looming smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by twilight. Mary Ellen pressed her cheek against his chest, breath shuddering. Why would you do this?" His hand tightened on the reins. "Because no one should die alone." The prairie opened before them, wide and endless. The sky bled into purple and gold, and for the first time in days, Mary Ellen felt the rope's phantom loosen from her throat. But in her heart, one question burned, hotter than the sunset. Who was this lonely gunslinger who had claimed her life from death's hand? The prairie stretched wide and empty, a canvas of pale grasses bowing beneath the restless wind. Mary Ellen clutched the saddle horn, the gallows still a phantom behind her, every hoofbeat carrying her farther from death and deeper into the unknown. The gunslinger did not speak. His arm around her was steady, his silence as heavy as the sky above. By the time they reached a rise overlooking a creek, dusk had settled into the folds of the land. He reined in his horse, swung down, and helped her dismount. Her legs wobbled. Beneath her, she'd spent too long with fear as her only nourishment. "You'll drink," he said simply, guiding her to the water. She knelt, cupping her hands, the coolness shocking her dry throat. The reflection staring back was hollow-cheeked, eyes rimmed with weariness, hair tangled by days of neglect. For a moment, she almost didn't recognize herself. When she turned, the gunslinger was already gathering dry brush, his movements efficient, quiet. Sparks soon licked upward, a fire blooming between them, its glow pushing back the shadows. He handed her a strip of jerky, rough but filling, and only after she chewed in silence did she gather the courage to speak. "You saved me," she whispered, the words cracking like dry wood. "But you don't even know my name." His eyes lifted, steel gray, catching the firelight. "Mary Ellen Price," he said. Her breath caught. "How?" Word travels. Small towns talk louder than church bells. His gaze lingered on her, unreadable. "They said you ran with cattle." "Thieves! I didn't believe it." She shook her head fiercely. "I never did. My brother and I were starving. I begged work where I could." "Folks don't need proof when they've already decided what you are." He studied her long enough that she felt stripped bare. Then he nodded once. Figured as much. Silence settled again, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, she asked, "Why risk yourself? A man could be shot for less than what you did today." He poked at the fire with a stick, sparks drifting like fireflies. "Because I've seen too many hangings that weren't just." His jaw tightened. "Lost someone that way once." Mary Ellen wanted to ask more, but the grief in his voice was a closed door. Instead, she folded her knees beneath her skirt, hands trembling in her lap. "And now? What happens to me?" The gunslinger leaned back, shadows carving lines deeper into his face. "You come with me. My cabin's a day's ride west, past the Cottonwood River. It ain't much, but it'll keep you fed, safer than town." She blinked at him. "You'd just take me in?" I won't leave you for the wolves." His gaze flicked to her, softer now. "Or men worse than wolves." The fire popped, sending sparks skyward. Mary Ellen wrapped her arms around herself, half from cold, half from the ache of disbelief. She had been one step from death, and now this stranger, this man with storm-gray eyes and a heart cloaked in silence, was offering her something she hadn't known in years: shelter. When dawn broke, the prairie unfurled gold before them. Mary Ellen dozed in the saddle, her cheek brushing against the gunslinger's chest, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait. He guided them westward with an ease that spoke of years spent wandering trails few dared ride. By noon, the cabin appeared, a small structure of weathered logs tucked against a copse of cottonwoods, a thin plume of smoke curling from the chimney. Chickens clucked lazily in a pen, and a single mule lifted its head in greeting. He helped her down, his hand firm on her elbow. This is it. To Mary Ellen, it looked like heaven. No shackles, no jeering faces, just space and quiet. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A cot, a wooden table, shelves lined with jars of dried beans and flour. He set about fixing coffee in a blackened pot, his movements practiced, while she sank into a chair and let exhaustion sweep through her. At last, she found the strength to ask, "What should I call you?" He hesitated, pouring the coffee. "Jack." The name settled in her chest like an anchor. Jack. A name plain as dust, yet heavy with the weight of a man who'd carved survival from the frontier itself. Jack slid the cup toward her. "Rest. Eat when I've cooked. You'll need strength." Her eyes burned with sudden tears. "I don't know how to thank you." His gaze caught hers, and for a moment, the silence between them was louder than words. "Don't die," he said simply. That night, as the prairie wind moaned through the cottonwoods, Mary Ellen lay on the cot while Jack dozed in a chair near the door, revolver across his lap. Sleep came to her in fits, haunted by ropes and gallows, but every time she startled awake, the sight of him, still watchful, guarding, calmed her heart. For the first time since she could remember, she felt something fragile stirring beneath. Her ribs, not safety, not yet, but maybe the beginning of trust. Morning broke with a pale wash of light slipping between the cottonwoods, laying a soft stripe across the cabin floor. Mary Ellen woke to it with a start, heart thudding as if some jailer had rattled keys at the door. Then she smelled coffee and rabbit stew and heard the scrape of a spoon against iron, and her fear loosened like a knot tugged by patient fingers. Jack had been up before dawn. He moved with the quiet economy of a man who'd spent more years than he could count making. Small things keep him alive. He'd snared a rabbit, set beans to boil, and warmed a square of cornbread he'd kept from the week before, dry but edible once butter melted into it like sunlight. "You'll need food in you," he said, ladling stew. Mary Ellen took the bowl in both hands so he wouldn't see the tremble. She ate slow, mind slipping between the comfort of steam against her face and the memory of a rope brushing her neck like a whisper that meant to be forever. She set the bowl down only when she was sure her voice wouldn't shake. "I have to go into town," she said. Jack's spoon paused above his bowl. He looked at her fully then, gray eyes narrowing, not in refusal but in measure. "Why?" "My brother." The words came out raw. "I left him with 2 potatoes and a heel of bread. He'll have nothing now, and I won't hide. If I stay tucked away, they'll make me a ghost that fits their story. I won't be that." A long breath. Then his gaze traveling to the door as if danger waited there with its hat off, polite and patient. "We'll ride after we clean up." She blinked. "You aren't going to tell me no?" Jack's mouth bent in something close to a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your life isn't mine to order." He stood. But I'm your shadow until you say otherwise. They worked together without speaking, she washing bowls with hot water he poured, he tightening the cinch on the mule's pack, checking the revolver he'd taken apart and oiled the night before. When she asked for a bit of calico from his stores, for mending, he pulled down a ragged bolt, surprised, maybe, at the sudden flash of color in the brown quiet of his home. She tucked it into her satchel along with a small notebook she found on a shelf and a stub of pencil. The notebook had a few pages left, ledger lines still faintly visible. She pressed her name onto the first blank space, then beneath it carefully. Andrew Price. Just to see it there. Just to insist he existed. By midday, they were riding the trail back toward the town, the heat laying its hand flat over the prairie, and holding everything still. Mary Ellen kept scanning the horizon as if the very shape of the sky might offer a sign. She didn't speak, neither did Jack. But the silence between them was not the old kind that had made her feel small. This silence breathed, made room for thought and nerves and the hope that steps taken together would lead to solid ground. The town rose from dust like a stubborn thought, false-fronted buildings with names painted where the sun had licked the letters pale, the Silver Coin Saloon, Hartley's Mercantile, a barber pole turning slow in the heat as if time itself were tired. The gallows was still there at the far end of the street, a black cross out of place in a pageant of ordinary life. Folks looked up when they rode in, expressions tightening as if some memory had returned wanting payment. They dismounted at Hartley's. Jack tied the horse and mule, staying half a step behind Mary Ellen as she climbed the store's plank steps. The bell on the door jangled, too cheerful. Mr. Hartley, spare as a fence post and just as stiff, looked her over like he was measuring cloth and found too many flaws. "We don't extend credit," he said, voice dry as swept corners. "I'm not asking for any," Mary Ellen answered, surprised by the steadiness of her tone. She put coins, Jack's coins, on the counter one by one. Flour, salt, lard, and a small bag of coffee. For a friend. She looked back at Jack, who said nothing, only watched the door without seeming to. A woman near the bolts of cloth, bonnet strings tight as a hangman's knot, whispered loud enough for it to carry. "That's the one they nearly strung up." "Should've finished the job," a man muttered behind a crate of nails. Mary Ellen's face flushed, but she didn't flinch. She picked up a yard of faded blue calico and laid it on the counter. "And this?" Hartley's jaw worked. He took the coins like they might burn him and wrapped the purchases in brown paper with more violence than paper deserved. Outside, the air felt thinner. Jack fell into step beside her. "You did fine." I kept my spine. Her mouth twitched. "That's something." They crossed to the whitewashed church on the rise, where a bell rope dangled in the open doorway. Children chased one another in the patchy shade, their laughter bouncing off the boards. A narrow woman in a plain dress stepped out, Widow Crane, cheeks sharp and eyes kind in a way that didn't announce itself. "I'm Mary Ellen Price," she said before the woman could speak. "I'm looking for my brother Andrew." Recognition rippled through the widow's face. "He came here yesterday," she said softly. "Hungry and scared, but polite. I gave him bread and sent him to Mrs. Dowd on the edge of town. She takes in strays and set him to shelling peas. He said he'd wait for you." Mary Ellen's knees loosened until she thought they might not remember how to hold her up. "Thank you," she managed. "I'll fetch him this evening." "Take care," Widow Crane said, glancing past Mary Ellen toward the saloon, where two men leaned in the shade, faces turned but not hidden, watching the way buzzards watch, sky that looks like it might collapse. Not everyone likes a story that contradicts the one they've already told themselves. Jack's gaze had gone there too. The taller of the two men, broad through the shoulders, hat tipped easy, a smile that showed too many teeth, nodded in their direction as if greeting old friends. "Coulter," Jack said under his breath. "He runs steers to the north and steals what he can't buy. The other is vain. His conscience fits in a vest pocket with his pistol." "They're the reason I was blamed," Mary Ellen whispered, the truth curdling as it formed. "Men like that, people believe them first." "They like a noose. Better than they like doubt," Jack said. "We'll be fast." They didn't make it 3 doors before Sheriff Amos Keene stepped from an alley, the star on his vest dull as neglect. "You got nerve, bringing her back." His eyes slid to Mary Ellen. "That pardon you gave yourself yesterday isn't legal." Jack didn't move his hand, didn't raise his voice. "You set a rope for the wrong neck. Fix it or keep your... distance." Keene's mouth thinned. "Posse's talking? Don't be out after dark." "We won't," Jack said, meaning they would be out of sight before dark, which was another way of saying the same thing. They found Mrs. Dowd at her fence plucking a hen, feathers drifting like summer snow. Andrew looked up from the stoop, where he sat stringing beans. He was smaller than Mary Ellen had held him in her memory. How had fear made him so much smaller? But his eyes lit in that way that made her heart knock against its cage. She knelt, and he folded into her, bone and boy and the smell of dust and beans. "I thought," he started, and then sobs took the rest. "I'm here," she said, rocking him. "We're all right." Mrs. Dowd nodded, shrewd and kind. "He can go with you. Take a sack of beans. I don't like the look of the men talking at the saloon door." They didn't ride straight for the cabin. They cut west over ground that wouldn't hold prints, and then north until Jack was satisfied. No one followed. They reached the cottonwoods at dusk, a thin thread of smoke already rising from the chimney. Jack had left the fire banked safe. It welcomed them home. Inside, Andrew ate stew with the single-minded joy of the rescued. Mary Ellen tore the blue calico into strips and set to mending Jack's torn shirt, each stitch a small prayer for a future that didn't yet know its own name. After she settled her brother on the cot, she pulled the ledger notebook onto the table and wrote, "Andrew, if fear comes in the night, breathe like the wind through wheat. In, out, it passes. We are not the story they told." She tore the page and tucked it beneath his palm. Jack sat by the door, gun across his lap, oil rag in his hand. In the lamplight, his face looked older and kinder, like a landscape that had been harsh long enough to learn mercy. "You were brave in town," he said. "I thought my knees would fold like wet paper." She kept stitching. "They didn't." "Brave isn't knees," Jack said. "It's not running." A sound then, so small she might have imagined it if Jack's head hadn't lifted at the same instant. Not coyote, not wind. A step, cautious and mean, on dry grass. Jack blew the lamp out with a breath that barely stirred the air. Night came down like a curtain. They could hear Andrew's soft sleep, the cottonwoods whispering, and beyond that, the slow drag of a boot choosing where it meant to stand. Mary Ellen's fingers found Jack's sleeve in the dark, not clinging, only locating the reality of him. He put the revolver in his right hand, the other hand finding her wrist for a heartbeat, a silent vow and a question both. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. A shape slipped between the trees. Another answered. From the other side, a murmur like laughter with the joy burnt out of it. And on the cabin latch, when the next breath of wind came, something tapped, soft and cruel. At dawn, they would see the length of new hemp tied there, neat as a ribbon. For now, they only heard it, the old story knocking, insisting. The shadow of the noose lay long as a river across their floor. The knock wasn't a hand. It was the soft tap of rope against the latch, like the memory of the gallows had ridden the wind to find them. Jack's breath thinned. He touched Mary Ellen's wrist once, then pointed to the floorboards by the hearth where the rug's edge curled. Trap, he whispered. She slid the rug back and found the narrow door of a root-cellared hole, black, cool air rising. Andrew stirred on the cot, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mary Ellen crossed to him, calm as a schoolmarm, though her heart ran. She knelt so their faces met level. "Down you go, like we practiced." They had not practiced, but the words steadied. Him. She folded the ledger note into his palm. "Breathe like wheat. In, out. We are not their story," and kissed his forehead. Outside, a voice like a smile with a knife in it sang, "Evening, Jack. You brought company home." Coulter. Another, voice higher, pinched, vain. "I favor finishing what the town started." Laughter raked the dark. Hooves shifted. Boot leather creaked. More than two. Jack pressed a shotgun into Mary Ellen's hands. Short, old, but clean. "2 shells," he breathed. "Shoulder it. Don't lean your cheek too hard." He met. Her eyes, not to command but to ask. "Are you standing?" "I'm here," she said. Not bravado, a decision. Jack slid to the window seam at the hinge side of the door, revolver low. Mary Ellen ducked to the table, quiet as a cat, and upended the flour sack into a wooden bowl. Her fingers found the blue calico strips she'd made for mending, and soaked them in the bucket by the door. Wet cloths, flour, the heavy iron kettle still warm from stew, domestic things gathering into a plan. Coulter's rope whisked the latch. The door held, barred with a plank. "We can be gentlemen," he called. "Send out the girl. You keep the boy. Fair trade." Mary Ellen pictured the churchyard whispers, the deputy's shove, the knot brushed against her throat. Something inside her, all soft places, set like clay in a kiln. "I am not a trade," she said, low, to herself, to the room, to the night that had once agreed to her dying. A scrape at the side wall. Someone easing along the logs. Jack's hand lifted, counting without words. 1, 2, 3. The window shattered. A hand came through with a lit rag, the stink of kerosene sharp. Mary Ellen moved first. She caught the rag with a wet quilt and smothered it under her boot, steam sighing up. In the same breath, she flung a fist of flour through the broken window. It bloomed white in the dark like a ghost, choking the man outside into a hacking cough. Jack's revolver cracked once. The cough ended. A body thumped the porch rail. "Careful," Vane hissed, somewhere right of the door. "He bites." Mary Ellen's shoulder touched Jack's sleeve. He glanced down, took the calico she pushed into his hand. "For later," she whispered. It would be bandage or burial strip, and they both knew it. "Last ask," Coulter sang. "I'm a merciful soul." His men chuckled. 3 shapes now, edging between cottonwoods. 2 by the woodpile, 1 climbing onto the rain barrel, trying for the eaves. Mary Ellen slid the bar up an inch, enough for her to see the hinge seam glow with breath. "Andrew?" she whispered toward the floor. The answer floated up. 2 careful taps. "I'm here." "On me," Jack mouthed. He threw the latch and yanked the door wide. The night rushed in with dust and gun oil smell and the shape of Coulter's grin thrown long by torchlight. Jack fired. Right, left, 2 shots fast, the way a man writes his name he's had since birth. One of Coulter's men spun and fell. The other dropped to a knee and howled. Mary Ellen stepped into the doorway before fear could revise her courage. Vane was there, thin as a fence rail and twice as mean, knife out, pistol half raised. She didn't aim. She lifted the shotgun. To her shoulder, the way Jack had shown, felt its stock-kiss bone and squeezed. The blast slapped the night. Vane went backward into the dirt like the earth had insisted on him. "Hell," Coulter breathed, a prayer to a god he didn't respect. The torch he'd been holding flared as kerosene dripped. He hurled it, and the porch skirting took with. A hungry hiss. Flames hurried under the floorboards toward the door, toward the ragged gap where night and home argued. "Water," Jack said. Mary Ellen was already moving, wet quilt to the crack. Kettle dumped steaming across the threshold. She grabbed the bucket and handed it to Jack, who threw water in a low arc that swallowed fire's language for a second. Heat licked her skirts. She stamped, soaking hem, smoke, biting her throat. A muzzle flash from the cottonwoods, high, careful. Jack staggered. Not a fall, but something had struck. He took a step back and put a hand to his side. It came away dark. Blood blooms like secrets, sudden and not to be argued. "With Jack," Mary Ellen said, and the name held more than 4 letters. She thrust the last wet cloth into his grip and shoved him toward the jam where smoke folded low. "Breathe down. You won't faint on me." He didn't. He set his jaw, pressed cloth to his side, and lifted his revolver again, his breath, trimming to smaller pieces, measured as prayer beads. Coulter laughed, delighted to find pain where he'd intended it. He stepped onto the porch, boots lit from beneath by crawling flame, hat brim a black cutout against the stars. He swung the noose the way boys swing pails down by the creek. "You was halfway to heaven yestereve, girl," he called. "I'm only trying to finish your good start." Mary Ellen set the last of the flour bowl on the sill, lifted the iron kettle now empty but still heavy as truth, and walked straight at Coulter. He blinked, unsure. Women in his stories screamed, then fainted. This one came. He flicked the rope, loop dropping. It found her shoulder, bit her throat's side. The old panic rose up like a ghost to welcome her home. She put one hand inside the loop to keep it off windpipe and kept walking. "You're not God," she said, the words steady enough to surprise even herself. She swung the kettle. It caught Coulter's wrist. Bone cracked like a pistol cock. The noose went slack. He lunged with his left hand for her hair. Jack's revolver barked. Coulter jerked, stumbled, caught himself with a curse. "You're leaking, Jack," he taunted through his teeth. "Bleed out for me." He dove off the porch into the cottonwood shadows where men go to mischief and smoke. Fire wrote itself up the post, searching for roof tinder. Mary Ellen and Jack worked the bucket and quilt, dance of douse and stamp, until the blaze hissed to sulk and the porch settled into blackened breath. Another shot, wild, from the trees. It cracked a jar on the shelf behind them, dried beans, pattering like hail across the floor. Andrew sucked air below the boards, then found his wheat breath again. "Out the back," Jack said. "We take them from the woodpile." "Your side," she answered, and he grimaced a smile at the correction. He showed her his spare pistol, small as a palm, pressed it into her hand. "Easy trigger." They slipped out the back window, the night's cool grabbing sweat and turning it to a shiver. The cottonwoods fingered the sky. Crickets kept their own counsel. By the woodpile, a man crouched with a bottle and a cloth, another fire born of theft. Mary Ellen put the pistol where his shoulder met his neck and said, "Drop it!" He turned with a curse. The bottle fell and didn't break. She kicked it under the pile and, before he could think, brought the pistol down across his temple. He folded politely into the grass. A movement to her left. Coulter's shadow setting up to finish Jack where the cabin corner gave him cover. Mary Ellen didn't shout. She moved. She came in low, caught Coulter's injured wrist with one hand and his belt with the other, and they went down hard together. He twisted, faster, meaner, and slid a hidden blade from his boot. She saw the flare of it as starlight caught steel. Jack's shot snapped past, close enough for Mary Ellen to feel its heat on her cheek. Coulter's knife hand jerked. He got his knee into Mary Ellen's ribs. Breath left her in a soft grunt. He rolled, scrambling toward the trees. "Stay," Jack rasped. It wasn't to her. He was speaking to his own blood. He fired again, short. Wood spat. Night swallowed the sound of a man cursing himself mortal. Silence grew slow, suspicious. Smoke thinned, drawing the sky nearer. A horse tore loose from someone's bad tie and thundered away. Vane moaned somewhere by the door, then quieted into a different kind of stillness. Mary Ellen pushed herself up, tasting iron. Jack slid down the wall and sat, jaw gone gray. She went to him, set hands gentle but firm, and tore strips from the blue calico she had bought that day, while women whispered and men wished her dead. Not for burial, she thought, and wrapped the cloth tight around the wound, the knot neat, the pressure sure. Blood seeped and slowed. "Tell me if you fade," she said. "I don't aim to," he said, and tried to smile because she needed something to hold besides his weight. They waited like that, backs to blackened logs, listening, to night finish its sentence. When it did, the only answer was the river's far talk and Andrew's small knock from the trap. 2 taps, alive. Mary Ellen pulled the ledger again, lit the stub of a candle with a coal they'd saved from the angry fire, and wrote on a clean page even as her fingers shook, "We fought and did not run. Tomorrow we plant." She tore the page and slipped it in her pocket like insurance against forgetting. By dawn, smoke braided itself thin among the cottonwoods. Vane lay still where the shotgun had spoken. One of Coulter's men groaned and crawled toward his hat, then thought better. Coulter himself was gone, a stitched line of blood leading into the scrub. Cowardice travels light. Neighbors came with buckets and questions. The sheriff came with a face he'd practiced in a mirror. He looked at Vane's body, at Mary Ellen's bandaged hands, at Jack's shirt blooming red like a sunrise too close. "Seems to be you were attacked," he said, as if narrating for a jury he didn't yet own. "Seems," Jack agreed, voice hoarse. Mrs. Dowd arrived with Andrew in tow and a basket that steamed like mercy. Widow Crane followed, the boys from the church trailing, serious-eyed. The talk ran, but no one asked Mary Ellen to hide. She stood in the yard, hair damp from sweat, soot smudging her jaw, the noose Coulter had flung lying quiet at her feet. She lifted it, walked to the riverbank, and fitted over a driftwood limb. Then she tugged until the hemp unraveled into a single rope. She coiled it neat, set it on the porch for tying bean poles when spring came. Jack watched her through the ache. "You make uses out of things meant to end people." "We'll need a garden," she said, voice light but eyes not. "Beans don't plant themselves." The wind turned sweet with water and ash. The cabin still stood, scarred, smoke-kissed, but standing. Jack tried to push himself up and failed. Mary Ellen knelt, slid his arm over her shoulders, and helped him to his feet. "One more step," she murmured, "then another." He gave her his weight because pride without breath is foolish. Their shadows stretched long across the yard. 2 shapes held together now, not just by danger, but by the knowledge of what it costs to keep someone. Blood had written its small, terrible signatures. Fire had tested the timber of their separate spines and found them of a kind. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a horse blundered and a man cursed faintly. Coulter wasn't finished with them, but neither were they finished with themselves. And in the pale first light, with a boy safe and neighbors standing, Mary Ellen felt something settle where fear had lived. An anchor dropped, a claim staked. They sat on the porch steps, side by side, the rope for bean poles cooling between them like an ordinary coil of tomorrow. By noon, the yard looked like a place that had chosen to live. Neighbors hung quilts between cottonwoods, boys shoveled ash. Jack dozed on the porch bench, blood slowed under Mary Ellen's bandage. Andrew tapped a spoon on the step, keeping time, with the small brave music of a house that still stood. Mary Ellen made a garden out of the morning. She broke ground with a spade. When the handle blistered her palms, she wrapped them in blue calico, the same cloth that bound Jack's wound. She drove stakes and tied twine from the noose she'd unraveled, a ladder for beans not yet born. Each knot said future, not rope. Sheriff Keene returned with a stretcher for Vane. "Posse's after Coulter," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Ask who sold kerosene." "Read Hartley's ledger," Mary answered, straightening from the row. "Tell the town the noose they saved for me is holding up food." Keene swallowed. "I'll tell it," he said, and left. The cabin breathed. Mary washed and brought Jack bread and coffee. His fingers brushed hers. "You turned rope into a trellis," he said. "I won't be harvest for anyone's anger," she answered. "Eat." Afternoon thinned into bright dusk. Jack tried his legs, caught the door frame, when the world swayed. Mary was already there, shoulder under his arm. "Let it heal," she murmured. He looked at the furrows and rope ladder. "I've been a man who moved on," he said. "That looks like a way to stay." "You're allowed to," she said. Night fell sudden and clean, stars sharp as pins. Widow Crane took her basket and promised to return at sunup. The wrong wind came before she reached the trees, horse, sweat, kerosene, and a man who had run out of cleverness but not malice. Mary felt it along her skin. Jack did too. He didn't have to say Coulter's name. "Andrew," Mary said. "Under." The boy slid into the root cellar with the ease of a child who had learned 2 homes. They kept the lamp dark. Mary set the small pistol on the table, touched the ledger, and wrote 3 words to steady herself. "We stand together." A boot grated on the step. Coulter's voice came low, silk worn off. "1 minute of talk, Jack. Then I finish what I started." "Talk," Jack said from the jam. "Trade," Coulter said. "You bleed. I go free. Or I bleed. You hang for Vane." Mary stepped into starlight. "Or you lay down your gun and take the trial you never intended for me." A pause. Surprise. That the woman he'd written off still spoke. "You got sand," he said, "but I don't get bound." Mary had already set the snare. That afternoon, while tying bean lines, she'd run another loop low across the first porch step and hid it under scorched boards. Now she eased her heel and drew it tight. "You don't have to," she said, and yanked. Coulter pitched forward. He hit the porch hard. Jack moved through pain like an old acquaintance. They grappled. Coulter found the knife at his calf. Mary ground her heel on his wrist, and the blade skittered away. He bucked, catching Jack's wound. Jack's breath hissed, but his hands didn't quit. Mary slid the small pistol across the boards. "Left!" And Jack's left hand caught it and fired 1 warning shot into the post beside Coulter's head. Splinters and silence. Sheriff Keene stepped from the cottonwoods with 2 men, fetched by the noise and the night's testimony. He took in the rope at Coulter's boots, the knife on the floor, Jack pale and stubborn, Mary with dirt on her shins and resolve in her jaw. He nodded once. Coulter. Arson. Attempted murder. Keene's men hauled him up and bound him with the same hemp that had waited for Mary's neck. Quiet returned. Mary lit the lamp. Andrew climbed out and tucked into her side. Jack eased to the cot. She cleaned the wound and rewrapped it tight. Her hands shook once, then steadied. He watched her like a man surprised by mercy. "Mary Ellen," he said, rough. "I've been alone long enough to know its shape. I would call you my bride, if you wanted such a thing. Not as a fence, as a home. Not to own you, but to be owned by the same future." She looked at the trellis made from rope, at beans that would one day climb it, at the ledger open to sentences that refused fear. She had once been a woman others decided to end. Now she planted. The difference was breath. "I don't belong to rope or rumor," she said, smiling soft as rain. I could belong to a man who knows the difference between guard and cage. Then let me say it plain, he whispered, offering his hand instead of his will. Be my bride. Tonight, she said, under the stars, with my brother standing in the cottonwoods listening. They went outside together, Andrew between them, the lamp on the step like a small constellation. The sky opened wide enough to hold their words. Jack removed his hat. Mary set her palm over the steady thrum at his wrist. They spoke vows the way frontier people do, without ornament, with everything at stake. Widow Crane, hearing voices, turned back and stood a little apart. When they finished, she said, Amen, into the clean dark. Jack kissed Mary's brow, careful of tender places. Bride, he said, trying the word like a new shirt. It suited them both. They ate wedding stew off tin plates. Andrew asked if there would be cake tomorrow. Mary promised honey biscuits if the bees agreed. Before sleep, she wrote the day's last line. Tonight we made a home out of fear, a marriage out of mercy, a future out of rope. Above the cabin, stars held like nails in a well-made roof. The beans would climb, the river would keep talking, wounds would knit, and if you stood on the porch and looked east, you could imagine a small boy running bean rows in a season or two, while a man and a woman argued fence posts and harvest. If Mary Ellen's courage and heart touched something quiet and true inside your soul, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Out here in the Wild West, love may be hard won, but it's always worth the fight. Join us for more stories of grit, sacrifice, and hearts that endure against all odds.